David, I think a lot of people have been waiting for today's episode, wanting to hear your input with regard to this helicopter crash that tragically killed Kobe Bryant, his young daughter, and 7 others. How are you today, David?
I'm very well, thank you, Jason. It's good to be with you.
Good to see you as always. I think everyone watching, or I hope everyone watching, is aware, David, that these YouTube broadcasts that we do are sort of a precursor, sort of a lead-in to the sponsor-exclusive show that we're doing every Friday. That's David Hawkins' Discovery CSI. People can watch it on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. And for people who are seeing us for the first time, David, of course, your signature method is to identify technological nuances, patterns, technology signatures related to an unsolved crime, an unsolved mystery, and then to seek out patents that might help us understand how these things could occur. What have you got for us today?
Well, I think that's an excellent summary. I search around for summarizing or condensing what I do, and sometimes I just give up. But anyway, that's excellent. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, so the intriguing thing about the United States Patent and Trademark Office, in its wisdom, the government of the United States handed off the operation of the United States Patent and Trademark Office to the British company SERCO, which seems to be a remarkable dereliction of duty, if you will, or responsibility for the leaders of the American government. Because why would you hand off the crown jewels of your technology and details of all the, let's say, the weapons and economic advances to, well, a competitor and in some cases an enemy? But let me just go dig into the United States Patent and Trademark Office and its relationship to SERCO, and the possibility that this was a contrived crash of the Kobe helicopters. A number of really interesting patents inside the United States Patent and Trademark Office. One relates to the handoff of the communications with a mobile platform, such as the Sikorsky helicopter, from one ground station to another. And it turns out that SERCO is the world's largest non-state air traffic controller, with, I believe, 50 FAA contract towers operated in the United States, including the one at Hawthorne, which is, I believe, a municipality somewhere in California.
That's right.
What that means, of course, is that it may be that when one ground station or contract tower or just the air traffic control tower hands off control or communications to another, that obviously is intended to be seamless. But you know that we mix rather reluctantly with the group that describes itself as ethical hackers. And it struck me listening to this transcript, and I don't even pretend to be an expert in air traffic control, that there's something rather weird about the communications between the Van Nuys, is that the correct pronunciation?
Van Nuys. Van Nuys.
Van Nuys, where a woman's voice, obviously in communication with the pilot, hands him off or tells him to switch to the SoCal frequency, which is another air traffic control tower. And it would appear that the air traffic controller at SoCal believes himself to be in contact with the pilot, but whereas the previous handoffs had resulted in the pilot acknowledging the instruction to change and continuing to communicate about visual flight rules, etc., in this particular case, the communications from the pilot goes dead, at least as far as the SoCal controller is concerned. And I think that's indicative, or potentially indicative, that the pilot has been handed off to a rogue controller. And since the world's largest non-state air traffic controller is SERCO, its potential for jumping into that relationship and actually vectoring the plane into a crash, well, it's quite significant. It certainly requires an investigation, because SERCO is as big as the world's largest air traffic controller, was obviously controlling a lot of traffic on the morning of 911. And before wrapping up that particular section, on the 47th floor of the North Tower on 911, there was a meeting of SERCO shareholders, as far as I could see, led by members of Phi Beta Kappa and Kappa Beta Phi, engaged in what is known, or I'm becoming a little bit familiar with, live action role play, where a simulation can switch to a live action where someone gets killed. But do you think that's a reasonably good summary of what SERCO is potentially capable of? I'm not accusing them of flying the Kobe helicopter into a mountainside, but they certainly have the capability of doing so, if not the motivation. Over to you.
Well, I think it's interesting to explore. I'm lamenting my stupid typo that has people wondering if this is a red air traffic controller or a rogue air traffic controller or somebody wearing makeup.
Rouge.
I always misspell that word, but we're talking about a rogue air traffic controller. I mean, it's hard to say, David. Obviously, the purpose of this show is to explore what's technologically possible and not to ignore any possibility. It's certainly beyond strange that the United States would allow something as important as the Patent and Trademark Office to be outsourced to a British corporation. And it's basically, something that you and I have looked at over, I don't know how many episodes we've done at this point, certainly well over 100, I would think. But it's about sort of figuring this out, asking these questions, pointing to these technologies. And I'm telling you, David, in so many cases that you've raised these questions, the links are too coincidental to be ignored. And there's a lot of people who have questions about this Kobe Bryant crash. So I think it's worth looking into some of this.
Yeah, absolutely right. And so what I'm now very interested in is when I make whether it's an allegation or an assertion that there appears to have been a weapon available in the patent office and the opportunity for a company like SERCO to use it, and in certain cases, the motivation, because we have to understand now that the global economy today is structured around a fraud. And this is my allegation. The fraud being that carbon dioxide is a driver of catastrophic anthropogenic global warming, and artificial intelligence algorithms, which SERCO uses to process applications for patents, are being coded now to recognize people as a principal threat to the survival of the planet. Now, it's nothing personal, but let's say that the artificial intelligence algorithms coded by SERCO in its air traffic control service around the world has been adjusted to recognize certain flight patterns as excess producers of carbon dioxide. And I'm warning people, and I'll say it again and again and again, and you and I visited that Center for Research into the Arts, Social Sciences, and Humanities at Cambridge University, and the acronym, and there are no coincidences for that, is CRASH, right?
That's true.
And we had visited that center because I'd seen an article that the center was starting to work on research into artificial intelligence to detect hate speech. Now, I don't know if the average citizen in the United States or any of the Five Eyes countries or around the world understands the danger of letting a computer determine what is hate speech or not. Because, for example, it may be that there are certain key words coded into the algorithms, which, if detected in electronic mail communication, allow the computer to decide that the two parties on the either side of the email communications are engaged in hate speech because they're engaged in words like, I don't know, gay liberation front or et cetera, et cetera. So the point is now we are, all of us, including the subscribers to my show, we're facing now an unseen enemy that is deeming our communications, which are perfectly legitimate to explore this particular crash, they can deem it to be engaged in hate speech and shut us down or generally divert us. So we have,
Sorry,
going into
David,
the patent
let me
office.
interject something quickly there because it's very relevant to the inactivity on Crowdsource the Truth's main YouTube channel, the Jason Goodman channel. There was a show that I did with Charlie Robinson 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was all about a guy that you've spoken to me about quite a bit. What's his name? Howard Lutnick. And his coincidental connections to Jeffrey Epstein via real estate and things like this. So we put out this video, and Charlie was a real estate broker for many years. He did a lot of research and made a lot of connections with Jeffrey Epstein, Howard Lutnick, other people they had done business with, and we put up this video, and it got taken off of YouTube, alleging that it contained hate speech. But of course, we didn't use any hateful language. We didn't direct any of the content at anyone because of their ethnicity or even make fun of them. So people have to go to BitChute now if they want to see this. It's been removed from YouTube, and I don't want to show too much of it here, or YouTube will remove this video. But this is causing one of the strikes on Crowdsource the Truth's main channel, the Jason Goodman YouTube channel, that's preventing people from seeing a lot of our live streams. So it's interesting to see how these hate speech algorithms can be strategically used in this really sort of indirect way. Social engineers who are monitoring everything that we're doing have, they've tried to represent, David, that, you or I are incorrect about what we say because, for instance, the Kinetic North America social engineering protection appliance, they say, is an email filter. But of course, any artificial intelligence that could detect language in an email could easily detect language that's transcribed in real time on YouTube. And of course, people who are watching us right now on Crowdsource the Truth 2 on YouTube are going to be aware that they can simply turn on the closed caption option, and they're going to get a real-time transcription of what you and I are talking about. So certainly the same kind of Kinetic North America tools that would allow them to detect something in email are going to allow them to detect what we're saying here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've now shortlisted a group of patents that I believe facilitate live action role play where a simulation turns into a fatal event, and all of the game characters participating retreat back into the woodwork and basically undermine, ridicule, bankrupt, or trivialize the work done by the game character class, which would be described by this infuriating phrase, conspiracy theorist.
Right.
Now, when I was an engineer working in the oil industry, I was based in Paris, and I would be flown to areas where there were oil well blowouts because I became an expert in one particular service relating to put out the oil fires. If I'd said to my bosses, okay, David, you're off to the Persian Gulf to help put out an oil fire there, and I said, well, how do we know it's actually happened? Is it a conspiracy theory? I mean, they'd have fired me. Right?
Yeah.
So what's totally fascinating about the de facto shareholders of SERCO, and I would say, apart from the BBC, SERCO is public enemy number one for the survival of the United States as we know it today. People do not understand how dangerous this outfit is, right? And let me just explain again why it's so dangerous. It's shareholders that met on the 47th floor of the North Tower on the morning of 9/11, in my book, allegedly to stage a live action role play attack on the United States of America. Its de facto shareholders are two Greek life societies, secret societies, I think would be recognized by JFK in his speech of 1961. It's Phi Beta Kappa and Kappa Beta Phi. None of those people who met on the 47th floor of the North Tower of 9/11 have been interviewed either by the media or a organization that should have been concerned about what they were discussing, which is the FBI. Now, that's worrying because Kappa Beta Phi has two people of enormous influence in today's government under Trump. One is Wilbur Ross, right, the Commerce Secretary, who was 25 years with N.M. Rothschild and Sons Limited, which is the investment banker for Donald Trump, Queen Elizabeth II, and SERCO. And then another guy in the Kappa Beta Phi mix is Bloomberg, right, who I believe is self-financing a run to be the next president of the United States.
He is.
Right? That is to say, I don't think he needs to bother to go out and ask for money because he's a multiple billionaire.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I believe on those Boeing 727s, the Lolita Express, there were some Bloomberg terminals that would have allowed insiders to take a position on the panic in the markets of 911, where if you invested in defense stocks, you'd make a lot of money. And if you shorted airlines, you'd also make a lot of money. So that's worrying. Bloomberg and Wilbur Ross. And remember, you met with Wilbur Ross. Fascinating interview, right? You only had, 30 seconds or a minute, but they're congratulating themselves, the Trump White House and Wilbur Ross on having processed the 10 millionth patent for the United States of America, notwithstanding that the processing is being done using artificial intelligence algorithms provided by SERCO. And what I find so fascinating, apropos of 911 attack or the possibility that that was a live action role play, is what they used as the 10 millionth patent was a Raytheon patent that shows an image of ground zero taken through a Raytheon patented invention using three-dimensional imaging from laser. And it shows the total destruction of ground zero, but it shows it in a very interesting way for an engineer and anyone with a little bit of common sense, because there are certain buildings that are more or less intact and certain buildings that is destroyed. And I don't know if you're able to find that particular. Yes, that's the one. Now, just bring that. If you bring that back. Now, isn't that a fascinating image, Jason, to celebrate the 10 millionth patent, where it would appear that the technology was used to monitor the destruction at ground zero. Now, is it a diversion, or should we get back to Kobe Bryant?
Well, no, this is interesting to talk about. I mean, you might recall, David, that when I spoke to Wilbur Ross, he didn't want to talk about SERCO, he wanted to talk about space. And when I search YouTube for Jason Goodman and Wilbur Ross, I mean, I would think that at this point I have enough videos on YouTube that the search term Jason Goodman would bring back the one video that includes both myself and the Commerce Secretary. But instead what we get is a lot of videos of Wilbur Ross that have nothing to do with me asking him what's up with SERCO. And then a lot of videos about me that have nothing to do with Wilbur Ross. Here we go. Here is the brief talk with Wilbur Ross. But that seems like a very inefficient search coming to us from YouTube, which is owned by Google, which is the largest search engine company in the world. But people can go back and check out this video. There's only 4,341 views on it, which is not a huge number of views considering the Jason Goodman channel has almost 90,000 subscribers. I think there's a lot of things happening, David, to reduce the reach of some of the videos that you and I create, particularly when they touch on things that Wilbur Ross and other people with influence in that level don't want to talk about.
Well, let me just do a little reverse historical analysis and suggest to you that one of the most important live action role play events in America's history dates back to 1776. And so let's look at Phi Beta Kappa and Kappa Beta Phi. So my allegation would be that leaders or principals of Phi Beta Kappa, which is the honor academic society, the most prestigious one in the United States, that was established in 1776. And it has, I believe, 17 or 18 US presidents as members, 30 Supreme Court judges, and 120 Nobel Prize winners. So that's Phi Beta
Really?
Kappa. One of those Nobel Prize winners happens to be Jane Addams,
Hmm.
right, of 1931. Well, did you know, or did I know? I don't know that I knew that Jane Addams was Phi Beta Kappa
I
and a
didn't
very
know until
influential
you
woman.
told me.
Right, right. But I think this is germane to the issue. On the other side, you have Kappa Beta Phi, which is a de facto shareholder, if not a controller, in Serco, with people like Wilbur Ross and a guy called Fink, I think, who's the CEO of BlackRock and Bloomberg, right? But that also was established in 1776. So now there's a couple of events that relate to my analysis or vector analysis of live action role plays. One is that back in 1776, didn't a group of people dressed as American Indians throw tea into Boston Harbor?
Were they
And
dressed
wasn't
as
that
American
considered a
Indians?
proper, yes,
I didn't know
live
that
action
part.
role play, right? So you have Phi Beta Kappa, Kappa Beta Phi, which is the Wall Street. It's the only chapter of Kappa Beta Phi left. And all of its members, they're engaged, I think, once in a year in a black tie dinner. And I think they strip off their black ties and they do a bit of cross dressing and joshing and roasting and stuff like that. So it's a really weird group with some really, really odd names. So the title of Wilbur Ross is The Grand Swipe. Would
Yeah.
Americans please tell me what that conveys? This is the Commerce Secretary for me back in the UK. You swipe something, you steal it, right? So if now, am I accusing Wilbur Ross of being a thief? No, I'm accusing him of being out of touch. Maybe he's past his sell-by date, but if he doesn't know that SERCO is running the United States Patent and Trademark Office, he should resign, because what SERCO is capable of doing is putting together a group of patents, right, that allow people, let's say game characters, to engage in live action role play and switch a simulation to live fire. Now, we're looking, I believe, at a process with this coronavirus, right? Because on October the 19th of last year, at the Hotel Pierre, which I believe is in your backyard,
Hmm.
they held a simulation event called Event 201, sponsored by Johns Hopkins University, right? And financed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the simulation or the test event had as a prediction 65 million deaths.
Well, now wait a minute, David.
So
They've
far,
been very adamant about saying that they did not make a prediction at that event 201 that's been quote unquote debunked by such illustrious outlets as Snopes and other dopes. But there was something going on with this simulation of a pandemic. And I don't know that they predicted it so much as, I don't know. This event 201 was a
they,
3.5.
they assumed it, Jason, if I may
Yeah,
say so. I think the
yeah.
right word is they assumed a death of 65 million, just like with Hurricane Pam, right, which was a live action role play for events preceding the Hurricane Katrina bombing of the levees in New Orleans. They assumed 65,000 deaths if they could achieve a flood depth of 11 to 12 feet in the low lying parishes. So, this is splitting hairs. In terms of artificial intelligence and deductive reasoning, if they assume an exercise with 65 million deaths, they're supposed to be catering, making sure, I mean, otherwise, there's no point in doing the simulation of what kind of things need to be in place to prevent it. But in parallel with that, and prior to 2019, Event 2001, SERCO appears to have granted or processed a patent application by the Pirbright Institute in the United Kingdom for a coronavirus. And if one goes through the abstract of the coronavirus patent and the text, you find they're using reverse genetics to attenuate the virus. And I don't have to be a geneticist or a microbiologist to say, Well, if you can use reverse genetics to attenuate the virus and develop a vaccine, you can use reverse engineering and artificial intelligence to activate the virus and make it considerably more dangerous than SARS by actually coding the genes in the virus such that people carrying it become infectious before displaying symptoms, which is exactly what you've got now. You've now got, and I'm not sure people are listening to our show as they should, and I don't mean to be judgmental, but you've now got two huge cruise ships locked up with 4,000 passengers on board, where it would appear that is now a crucible for the breeding, if that's the right word, of the coronavirus, which
Wow.
is infectious, where the people are not showing symptoms. So when those 3,000 people get off those ships, where the hell are they going to go? I don't care whether they've been quarantined forever, right? You've now poised for making potentially true what the event 2001 assumed, predicted, described, whatever. So they are splitting hairs when they criticize us or basically try and stop people visiting our sites, because I think we're probably, if I may be so arrogant, you and I, with our respective talents, are probably the only people who can reverse engineer a live action role play which turns live and results in high value targets getting killed or mass casualty events, such as the 343 firefighters who died when the Twin Towers were demolished around their ears. Over to you.
Yeah, well, let me address some of the things that you've raised with the coronavirus, because it was interesting when it first started hitting the news maybe 3 weeks ago. I guess I had just returned from Norway with Charles Ortel, and you had mentioned that there was a patent on the virus, and I looked it up, and I found this patent here. This is a U.S. patent dated November 2018, and the applicant is the Pirbright Institute. So I was having difficulty finding it again when I tried Google just the other day. But when we check out the Pirbright Institute, it's pretty interesting because, let's see, what was I looking at? Partnerships here, our major stakeholders, right? So when you click on this, sure enough, it does list the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation right there as a major stakeholder in this thing that has a patent on the coronavirus. So they're saying, oh no, it's not the same thing. But it does seem remarkably coincidental that this event 201 occurs. And incidentally, when you were speaking before, I noticed in this description of the event, it talks about public health leaders participating as players. So, I mean, isn't this a live action role play? And when we look at these players, here they are. I don't know who any of these people are. I don't know if they even know what's going on here, but it's always worth kind of looking at these things, trying to make some connections, because you never know if there's a name in here that links to somebody else, or Avril Haines. Remember, Avril Harriman was, one of the Harriman brothers. I mean, we're just looking for coincidental links. And when we start to have these situations that seem too coincidental, like this event predicting a pandemic, it's funded by Bill and Melinda Gates. They're funding places that are doing research with viruses that now become pandemics. And we know that Bill Gates loves to send vaccines around the world. We know that he's got a history of being interested in, and members of his family being interested in, eugenics. So I don't know. What do you think, David?
Well, totally. I mean, I think what we're seeing now, and what I would like to encourage people to glean from our discussions, is I believe there's a procedure that I would arrogantly claim I pioneered in the 1980s of ground truthing live action role plays to see if the switch from the live action role play simulation ends up with someone getting killed, whether that switch can be driven by artificial intelligence or malice aforethought by a criminal actor. And I think these people are very, very smart, because by coding the artificial intelligence algorithms, which has obviously been shared with SERCO and SERCO is using in the patent office, they can actually get the AI pattern or the AI algorithm to control the body count at a mass casualty event or the time of death of a high value target like Kobe Bryant. Now, I believe Bishop Larry Gaiters believes that Kobe Bryant was a boule, which is an elite Black American society, I think, founded in 1910, that includes people like Martin Luther King and Eric Holder. And incidentally, Eric Holder's name as Attorney General is intimately associated with the Fast and Furious gun running racket
Yes.
under the Obama administration.
I'm glad you're
And
talking about that.
And at that shoot up at the Bataclan concert hall in Paris, they found a Fast and Furious gun. Now, this comes back to my theory that the way to reverse engineer live action role play is to look at the blocking note vector analysis. That is to say, if we take that gun, it's traveled along a certain path obeying the laws of physics. It was bought somewhere, if it's that Fast and Furious program. It may have been sold to cartel members south of the border, right? And the gun might have been turned around and shipped to a group of, let's call them game characters that needed to stage a mass casualty event in the Bataclan concert hall in Paris. Now, I can't remember the name of the band or the group that was playing there.
It was pretty.
It's a very
like death
it's a
oriented.
very scary, yeah, something like that. And so there's an image of these guys singing, and they stop singing. You can hear the shots ringing out, but they don't duck, right? And one possibility is that from a vector analysis point of view, the Fast and Furious gun, courtesy of Barack Obama and Eric Holder, was brought into the concert hall in the music instrument cases of the band. I mean, this is what people who are investigating crime should be doing. Every object, every player, every weapon that moves into a crime scene
Eagles of
before the
death
crime
metal,
occurs.
David.
Yeah, great name, eh? Like Dead on Arrival playing out at the pig farm, right? Which for me
Guns
means
are
that
certainly
the
death
women,
metal, right? If you get shot with it.
yeah. And if you take Dead on Arrival as the name of the group that used to play out at the Piggy Palace Good Time Society, if the women, maybe pregnant women, are being killed in the torture studios at 425 Carroll Street, right, then obviously you've got to get rid of the bodies. One way of getting rid of the bodies is taking them out to the pig farm, obviously then, serenaded by Dead on Arrival. I believe one of their songs is Last Scream of the Missing Women. Well, this is pretty spooky, isn't it?
Yeah. That's their song, is Last Scream of the Missing Women?
Yeah.
Wow. Come on,
So,
that can't be
you
a
know what,
coincidence.
Jason? They're laughing at us, these people, right? Going
Yeah.
back to Rockefeller's comment at, what is it, the 1992 or 3, either Bilderberg or the World Economic Conference, I can't remember. This clown says the world is ready to move to a supranational government of world bankers and an intellectual elite. On the 47th floor of the North Tower, the morning of 9/11, SERCO shareholders were represented, I believe, by Phi Beta Kappa, where these people would describe themselves as members of the intellectual elite, and I include the late Jane Addams and the not so late Bill Clinton, right? And the international bankers or world bankers would presumably be represented by Kappa Beta Phi, that includes Bloomberg and Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, the largest shadow banker in the world and a major shareholder in SERCO, and Mr. Wilbur Ross, who's the Commerce Secretary, who doesn't know that the United States Patent and Trademark Office is being run by the British company SERCO.
Well, I don't know that he
That I
doesn't
would
know
hold
that. He just
liable.
doesn't want to talk about it.
Well, in that case, I guess we do. And we have to, because what I'm urging our listeners to do, and this isn't appeal so much for money, although that's extremely important, that they become subscribers, because you and I think, have both plateaued recently. The closer we get to unraveling these crimes, starting with the scripts that are written before the crime occurs and then synchronize through the BBC with that spoken text display apparatus for the generation of television signals. SERCO and the BBC, and I'll come to that combination or that conspiracy in a minute, are capable of staging a live action role play event anywhere in the world with very little preparation, because they have a whole raft of networks that I believe are constrained to do exactly what they're told because of what was going on at Starnet at 425 Carroll Street for 4 years prior to the raid, when all the kit was taken away and installed somewhere else to carry on an operation that was basically committed to the global export and manufacture and production of hardcore adult and child pornography. And it is shameful for people to accept that that raid resulted in no prosecutions. All of the equipment and images of child abuse has disappeared, and I believe it's disappeared into the cloud, Internet Movie Database or whatever it is, and the National Crime Agency in the UK. Over to you.
Yeah. I wanted to point out, David, when you're talking about the Boule, this secret society that Bishop Gators introduced the Crowdsource the Truth audience to, this is also a Greek society, Sigma Pi Phi. And this is exclusively for black men, as far as I understand. There's a different one for black women, and they don't let black men into some of these other secret societies. So this one was formed, and yeah, as you pointed out, the bishop tells us that lots of different prominent black Americans are part of this, and this is the 10% of the black population that's intended to control the 90%. Bishop has called it the crab barrel theory and a variety of other things. But it's interesting that these secret societies are so pivotal in all of this. And for people who maybe haven't seen all of our previous shows, David, one of the most fascinating things about what you and I are doing is how there's a through line that kind of links these things all together. I mean, you were speaking earlier about SERCO, and I brought up an image of this guy, Rupert Soames, who is the CEO of SERCO, who is miraculously levitating on a bicycle here. I guess maybe he's riding it and there's a fast shutter speed on the camera. But this is one of these city bikes that you see around London and New York City. It's odd. In New York, the city bikes, they're owned by Citibank, which seems weird that Citibank, which is so busy making money being a bank, would care at all about bikes. And it fits into this whole carbon dioxide scheme that we've spoken about quite a lot. But, just this guy is the brother of Nicholas Soames, who is an alleged Mendenhauler, who Rashad Mendenhall is an alleged member of the Boule, owns a production company called Nappy Rose. A lot of people have spoken to us about how the rose is potentially a reference to the Rose Cross, the Rosicrucians. This is a symbol that is frequently associated with some of these secret societies and some of the bizarre rituals that they get involved in, including possibly Mendenhalling, which is a ritualistic form of rape, according to allegations that you and I have explored. And it also is closely linked to buck breaking, a practice that the bishop told us about, which was exercised, a horrible, torturous practice that was exercised by slave masters in the United States in the South during slavery, whereby the most robust male slave was beaten and raped in front of all the other slaves to break their will, to break their spirit. We then found this guy who is a football coach or was a football coach at Brigham Young University in Utah. Guy's name was Bronco Mendenhall. And I can't think of anything that bucks more than a Bronco. And what else is going on in Utah, David? The National Security Agency has its 1 million square foot complex, and the traitorous Mitt Romney is a senator from there.
And the National Security Agency Director of Signals Intelligence, Maureen Baginski, through 911, convened a meeting shortly after with her 50 colleagues, including Bill Binney, and she said, you have to understand 911 is a gift to the NSA. We can now get all the money we want. right?
This
Which
woman's
obviously
crazy.
horrified Bill Binney and all those characters. Well, it's crazy because then the woman moves on through the FBI and she becomes signals director, effectively. I'm sure that's not the exact title for the FBI, and she institutes an intelligence network for the FBI. Well, what did they have before she appeared on the scene, which I think was about 2003 to 2005, and then she weasels her way to become the vice president of intelligence services for SERCO, right? Let me just mention a couple of other names. You were talking about Citigroup, Kappa Beta Phi. You have, let's say, you have Sanford Whale, former chief executive officer of Citigroup, and various other people. Now, Citigroup provided, I think, $380 million of loan finance to Trump Shuttle Inc. So I cast no aspersions on President Trump, but I do say when a lender provides a loan on that scale to a borrower, then the borrower is going to be watched very carefully because the lender doesn't want to lose all their money. And there's various ways of recovering money from a defaulting lender. And I believe these institutions, I think, if that's the right term, Phi Beta Kappa and Kappa Beta Phi, were both established in 1776. And going back to the development of what is called sportsbook betting in this present day and age, we know that in 1693, the world's most exclusive premier gambling club, White's Club, was created. And in 1776, White's Club, when they gamble, these people, and they became extraordinarily wealthy aristocrats, many of them investing in the British East India Company, whose tea was tossed into Boston Harbor. I don't know if you knew that. I mean, the British East India Company's nose was out of joint. But what I'm getting at there, to put money down on the time of a high value target's death, like JFK, everyone in the world who's placing the bets needs to know the precise time. And the inventor of modern timekeeping, I believe, was a guy called John Harrison, who invented the marine chronometer. My late father, was a collector of antique clocks, and he admired, as I do, the engineering genius of John Harrison, because he built marine chronometers that could be put on a sailing ship at Bristol and sail to Jamaica and back, and over a 3 month period, neither lose nor gain more than 5 seconds, which is the most extraordinary achievement in engineering, given what was available back in 1776 is when John Harrison died. But I think that was the basis for modern accurate timekeeping and sportsbook betting, because the modern clock that provides the most accurate time in the world is the National Physical Laboratory clock in Teddington in Middlesex, which is a cesium fountain clock with modifications that is in the de facto custody of SERCO.
Now, David, we've gotten a bit far afield from our topic about Kobe Bryant, but we will come back to that. I don't mind, because we always get into interesting conversations, and I mean, it speaks to some extent to the degree to which these things are interconnected. So you mentioned Trump's shuttle. I'm very fascinated with the Boeing 727. Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express was a Boeing 727. We've explored in past episodes of Discovery CSI the unique functionality of the Boeing 727 with its rear door that can be opened in flight, its remarkable stability in low-speed flight. So I just noticed from that picture the tail number on one of the fleet of the Trump shuttle, which were all Boeing 727s. This was N918TS, and this was an aircraft that was originally operated under the tail number N8847E by Eastern Airlines, purchased by the Trump shuttle in 1989, sold then to the U.S. Air Shuttle, which became U.S. Airways Shuttle, and it was later scrapped. Interesting, U.S. Airways was purchased by or merged with Northwestern, for which Field McConnell was a pilot. And certainly Field McConnell's sister, Christine Marcy, was interested in the Boeing 727 because she used them for the U.S. Marshals Service. Isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Christine Marcy called Field in December of 1988 and asked his advice on what she should do because airlines didn't want to transport prisoners shackled to the seat because of safety. And she, I think, by 1984 or 1985, had taken money from the United States Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund and bought a Federal Marshal's 727 for the transportation of prisoners. By 1994, under the Clinton administration, whatever it was called, it became the United States Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System. And from that period, 1984 through to 1998, I believe, Christine Marcy, I believe, was the de facto director of flights controlled by the United States Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System. So my theory about the movement of prisoners using the Jerome Lemelson patent and the artificial techniques, she would have been in a position to use that patent, which I think was assigned in 1998, to move prisoners or game characters into a crime scene before the crime occurs, which might include, for example, the environmental cleaners on the lawn outside the Pentagon, or fast forward to the present, to the people in the control towers who may have handed off the Kobe Bryant plane into a vacuum where a rogue air traffic controller could fly, helicopter could fly it into the mountainside and kill Kobe Bryant and his fellow passengers in a way that wouldn't draw attention to some of the extraordinary characteristics of the flight path of the plane, because it appeared to have accelerated, descended very fast. Now, again, I'm not enough of a pilot to say, even if that pilot who was qualified for instrument flying, although the helicopter charter service, if that's what it was not licensed to fly in low visibility area, would a man with that, I think he had 8,000 or 9,000 hours of experience, would if he was disoriented, behave in that way? Like, why would he accelerate? I mean, he flew down into the mountain. So there's a lot of questions to be asked about the vectors or the blocking points, which apparently he received, or the pilot received, or the equipment received, that flew it into the mountainside. Over to you.
Well, we have just a few minutes, David, until we transition over to our sponsor-exclusive show on Patreon and Subscribestar. We'll be focusing more on the Kobe Bryant helicopter crash and some of the patents. Of course, we've been discussing how SERCO controls the patent office. They're a contractor to the U.S. government, to the British government, and they have, intense control over this patent office. I've just been perusing this U.S. Marshals site. It's interesting because this is one of the sites we've been back to many times. Someone is saying that the comments are censored. Ziggy, I'm not censoring any comments. That would be happening automatically by YouTube if it's happening, but I'll try and have a look at it. The thing I wanted to say about this U.S. Marshals Service website, this is weird that a law enforcement website would have this prominent tab about business opportunities. Incidentally, you've spoken to us many times about how Christine Marcy is involved with the Small Business Administration. And look at that, David. Have we discussed this before?
Well, yeah, very quickly. So what intrigues me is what game characters can be deployed and be totally obedient in a live action role play event. Well, obviously, one group of people would be the group of people that travel on the Conair aircraft because, well, they're prisoners and they're guards. And because of the control over the life of a prisoner or the quality of life of a prisoner in a prison system, for example, Julian Assange, the access to the outside world, to family, contacts, protection from assault by fellow cell members, it's almost total control. So Christine Marcy, I would say, would have a really extraordinarily powerful image in the minds of the average con in the United States, because there would be an internal grapevine within the prison system. Say, when this woman tells you what to do, you do it, right? Otherwise, she can put you on a plane and crash the plane. Moving on, in 1998, she becomes the chief operating officer.
But let me pause
the
you there,
Small
because I don't
Business
want to go
Administration.
into too many details about Christine Marcy, but dovetailing off of what you've just said, because we only have a few minutes left, if she's got this control over prisoners through artificial intelligence and the Jerome Lemelson patent, is it possible that a similar level of control over people who aren't overtly prisoners, but are intended to convey messages that whoever wants these messages to be conveyed, someone like Kobe Bryant, and perhaps artificial intelligence would determine to upgrade or downgrade his privileges, including the privilege to continue exhaling carbon dioxide. They might make a decision based on something that he's done or not done.
Well, absolutely. And that's the danger of switching over the control of someone's exhalation potential to an artificial intelligence algorithm, because they may deem you, and I believe Christine Marcy said at the funeral or the service of Field and her father, she described people like, not like, she wasn't obviously referring to you and me, but the peasants as mindless breeders and useless breathers. This woman is an elitist, and I think she's it's a very questionable what kind of control she has over the future of the United States through the Small Business Administration 8A operation, which has a loan portfolio of $70 billion and can be deployed small businesses at any target, and the transportation of the most dangerous people in the world in and out of the country, possibly without even going through customs. Over to you.
Yeah. And with that, David, we're going to close out our show here, and we'll be continuing in just about 8 minutes on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. If you're intrigued by what we've been talking about, I really do encourage people to become sponsors. You're going to get access to a huge and continually growing library of content, and you'll learn all about Christine Marcy and the secret societies we've been talking about, the interconnection between these things, and how technology and patents can be fraudulently, negligently, or what's the other way? Misused.
Recklessly and willfully.
Recklessly and willfully, exactly. So we'll see everybody in just a few minutes on Patreon and Subscribestar. Thanks for watching, everybody.